would like to get the peace. It should have happened a long time ago. The Ukraine war with Russia should have never happened. If I were president, it never would have happened. We're trying to get it ended. One way or the other, we have to get it ended. So
President Zelensky doesn't agree to this deal by Thursday. Will you cut off military aid? Will you cut off the intelligence?
Then he can continue to fight his little heart out.
So you hear the president there not saying explicitly what the consequences might be if Zelensky does not agree to this deal, but I think implicit in his answer is that this will become Zelensky's war and that he will essentially wash his hands of this. Now, this has all generated an enormous amount of concern among the Europeans. European leaders were meeting today, including at the G20 in South Africa, and they came out with a statement that said this plan still needed a major amount of work. And they say that in particular, they're concerned about the provisions of the document that would limit the size of Ukraine's military. They say that they reiterate that the implementation of elements relating to the European Union and relating to NATO would need the consent of EU and NATO members respectively. And remember, Europe has essentially been cut out of this entire process. They're not part of this negotiations. You've also heard from Republicans in Washington, including the senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, saying that the plan as it stands now could be problematic. Perhaps more blunt was Mitch McConnell, not a fan of President Trump's by any means, who said that Putin has spent the entire year trying to play President Trump for a fool. Jessica.
All right, Kevin Liptak with the very latest now from the White House. Thank you for that. We are joined by former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker. He also served as a U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations during the president's first term. Ambassador Volker, good to have you here. We really appreciate your time tonight. I just first want to get your general thoughts about this deal. Is this a feasible framework? It certainly heavily favors Russia.
Right. As this document has been drafted, it is one-sided. It only places limitations on Ukraine, not on Russia. It provides assurances to Russia, but not to Ukraine, really. And Russia is the one that has invaded Ukraine twice. So, if anything, instead of asking for Ukraine to withdraw from Ukrainian territory, we should be asking Russia to withdraw from Ukrainian territory. And this plan doesn't do that. So there's a lot of things that are fatally flawed with this plan as it is. That being said, when you ask if this is a framework, look, I think if you sit down with the Ukrainians, with our European allies, France, Germany, UK, as will happen tomorrow in Geneva, you can then start amending this so that it becomes something reasonable. Instead of unilateral limits on Ukrainian size of Ukrainian military, there are no limits on the size of the Russian military, and they're the ones that have invaded. You could either make it reciprocal, or you could lift those limits. Instead of saying Ukraine has to withdraw from territory, how about just having a ceasefire in place so that the de facto rules on the ground are there? Instead of recognizing Russia's conquests as illegitimate, why don't we just say, we accept that they are occupied, we're not going to contest this militarily, we'll pursue this by other means.
And so, as you're describing all of that, why do you think this plan is so lopsided toward Russia at this point?
Well, because it was cooked up only with the Russians. I don't know Steve Witkoff. I'm sure he's a decent guy, but he has never been to Ukraine. He doesn't know Ukraine. He doesn't know these issues. And the Russians have been feeding him information that is simply wrong. For example, in this agreement, there is something about religious freedom in Ukraine. If there's a problem with religious freedom, it's in Russia and Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine. It talks about respect for culture. Well, Russia is going about erasing Ukrainian culture, forcing people not to speak Ukrainian, removing textbooks that are in Ukrainian, putting them into Russian. This is a very ill-informed plan as well.
And so for Ukraine, what kind of leverage do they have right now? What kind of leverage do the Europeans have to make sure that they are properly represented in any deal?
Well, ultimately, the leverage here is that instead of the U.S. abandoning Ukraine, which is what President Trump may view as a threat, it's going to be Ukraine and Europe abandoning the United States. which is not in our interest as the United States, and it would mean much greater risk of conflict in Europe, possibly a wider war. But Europe essentially cannot live with a situation where Putin has seized territory by force, been rewarded for that, and feels emboldened to do it again. And is exonerated for any war crimes that he's committed in the process. This is very dangerous for Europe and European security going forward. Europe will not be able to accept that. So this is why I think everyone is focused on amending this plan, fixing it so that it is more balanced, more reasonable. But short of that, if this is take it or leave it, I have a feeling it's the U.S. that's going to be left.
At this point, how would you grade this administration's efforts on ending this war?
Well, that's a tough question because up until President Trump took office, no one was talking about ending the war. You had the Biden administration saying, as long as it takes, providing some weapons, but with limitations, and not providing other weapons. So it was always a little too little, a little too late, with no clear strategy as what we're going to do. President Trump has squarely placed ending the war at the center of the discussion. I think that's a very good thing. I also think he has gotten the U.S. and Ukraine in agreement on a ceasefire immediately in place if we can get it, and he's got Europe stepping up to do a lot more. Those are all positive. But when it comes to handling Vladimir Putin, I think the administration's approach has been all wrong. Putin only responds to force. If he feels weakness, if he does not feel any counter pressure, he keeps pushing and he keeps advancing. And the result of that is the kind of plan that we saw presented the other day.
All right, Ambassador Kurt Volker, thanks for your thoughts on this. We really do appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, once a leading figure in the MAGA movement, says she's now resigning from her congressional seat, the longtime Trump ally becoming embroiled in a bitter public fight with the president.